Start.
Looks like it.
Yeah, good. Okay. Okay, so my talk is called Beyond Your Reckons, from feels, which are different than feelings. We'll get into that in a second, to facts. So what is truth? And thankfully, in a totally uncoordinated effort, Matt's done a really good sort of setup for some of this piece here. So I think it's important to think about like what we think we know about the world around us, which Matt just spoke to, and also what sort of actually exists in an objective way, right? And the difference between a sort of personal truth, a lived experience, and the fact that, you know, that wall over there is a particular shade of white, or that glass will break when I drop it from a sufficient height onto a hard surface, right? Like, and all of these things are true, but they're different sort of aspects of what that word might mean. So you have this idea of what your truth is, right? What your personal view of the universe around you is, and you know, beyond that, whether or not something is your opinion as opposed to your truth. And that's like a really fun line. That line perhaps is what a reckon is, that sort of vague space between you sort of saying your opinion into the world and knowing a thing to be correct. And so, you know, if you think about that sort of broad space, then you get to this idea of what you know. And I think Matt's talk did a really wonderful job of speaking about what you've internalized and what you've learned. But that brings up a sort of interesting thing that we're going to have a small sidebar on. I don't have a video, unlike the other lightning talks. I do, however, have a tangent. So the tangent is this idea of types of knowledge. So, you know, as was just hinted at, you know, there's a bunch of different kinds of knowledge, and English as a language is difficult in this regard. Lots of other languages I have learned recently have different words, and English just talks about knowing, and they mean a bunch of different kinds of things for this. So the first point is that there's a really great field called epistemology. One of its greatness is that it's called epistemology. It's a wonderful word, but to say it sometimes. So epistemology is the discipline in philosophy of knowledge and knowledge acquisition. And within epistemology, there's this kind of split. And you can think about knowing that, so that's like factual knowledge, like ticking things off, like the color of the wall, or like that gravity has a specific measurable acceleration between two masses. But there's also knowing how, which can be commonly called know-how, right? So that's like a kind of functional knowledge, like I know how to give a talk without fainting, right? Like I know how to knit. I don't actually. I know how to ride a bicycle. I do. So that's like a different kind of knowledge, though, than kind of lists of facts, right? But then there's another kind of knowledge which is sometimes called like knowing why, or like sort of scientific knowledge, right? Going from lists of facts to underlying theories that you have sort of that have predictive value, effectively. It's a kind of good way to think about that. And then there's this other sort of kind of knowledge that we're not going to spend any more time on in this talk, other than to say that it's over there, which is sometimes referred to as knowledge by acquaintance, or like your own personal knowledge. So like, I did these things, I am this way, I feel this way, I love this person, right? Like this is a kind of knowledge and is dealt with in the field of epistemology, but it's a different sort of personal knowledge. So we're going to spend the rest of the talk dealing with this idea of knowing that, of facts. So here's a chart. It's one of those great kinds of charts that don't actually have a numeric scale. So we have a kind of two-dimensional way of thinking about all concepts of knowledge, right? So you've got at the bottom abstract knowledge, and at the top you've got concrete kinds of knowledge, and then you've got a kind of false things that are not actually correct and true. Don't worry too much about true. True is a fun idea. So if we kind of put some bounds, right? So up in the concrete truth, you've got facts, right? Specific, demarcated ideas that are measurable. The sort of opposite, but still at the same level of concreteness, you've got this idea of lies, which are also demarcatable and measurable, but not the right measurements, right? That wall is brown. You see that wall is brown. That's a good example of a lie. So, and then down you've got bullshit. Now, bullshit is a really sort of fascinating idea of conceptual non-truth. Harry Frankfurt has a really good essay on bullshit that Tom Stewart gave a lightning talk on, in fact, a couple of lightning talk sessions ago. It's a really good, approachable sort of Intro to Epistemology as an Idea, actually. That's quite readable if you don't fancy the idea of 30 pages of philosophy. And so then, sort of across from that, you've got this idea of logical reasoning, where you're sort of thinking about conceptual ideas, right? Like, what is the universe? Is perhaps a kind of truth, but it's not very specific or concrete. And so beyond that, we can sort of fill some things in, right? So like, away from facts, you've got data, which is about as concrete, but not necessarily as true, which is a fascinating thing. Not all data is correct. And then you've got evidence, which is kind of synthesized from piles of facts, and then becomes a little bit more conceptual, but is hopefully just as true. And then you've got these kind of statistical tools that are at some level neutral, but in their application can be either true or false. So like the kind of grand idea of lying with statistics as a trope, right? But of course also statistics is in many ways how you get from facts to sort of grander ideas of knowledge. Okay, so let's talk about facts for a little while. So what is a fact? So it's stuff you can measure, right? So a really good way to sort of think about the space of facts is if I can measure a thing, then a statement that I just measured is probably a fact. There might be some facts that exist outside of that definition. That's not exhaustive, but it's a really good sort of quick test. And to that effect, it's also stuff you can test. So if I can state something in a way that has a test associated with it, then that's probably implying a fact. So this is the kind of how you can put this idea into practice and move a little bit more away from reckons in your sort of assertions in life. So when you're thinking through ideas, any idea in your existence, if you frame them as testable hypotheses, you're less likely to lead yourself astray. So here's a nice worked example. So I buy too many things at the market when I'm hungry is a thought that I have anecdotally on a semi-regular basis. Perhaps you also have had this thought in your mind. So, you know, and there's all kinds of like fun reasons why that may or may not be true, even though I've thought it. And then as I've thought it, I've had an experience where I walked out of a store with too much food, right? Like biases are legion, and they're a little bit out of scope for the 3 minutes I have left in this talk. But how can we sort of reapproach this idea in a way that presents a testable hypothesis? So here's like a quick reformation, right? So people tend to spend more money at the supermarket when they haven't eaten in some number of hours, right? Okay, so now we have a sort of specific measurable thing on both sides of the statement we're making, right? So instead of saying I'm hungry and I bought too much stuff, we're actually saying I haven't eaten in some amount of time that's fixed, and therefore I've spent more money than I typically do, where we've got sort of background pile of data. That's good. We can do better. So if we flip this on its head, see we even tinted the picture, then the time since my last meal has no impact on my total spend at the supermarket. Now, what I've done there is turned the question upside down. So I'm sort of framing it as a negative, where if this is not true, then the thing I started with is implied, right? So this idea of testing the negative is what's called a null hypothesis, and it like permeates all of like statistical knowledge acquisition. So and there's lots of nice mathematics that fall out of working towards these kinds of questions, and they come from this idea that it's much easier to falsify a statement than to definitely prove that it's true. So like sort of you have two piles of data, saying that they're utterly unrelated is a thing you can actually show. Saying that they're clearly correlated or worse causal is very difficult. So when you turn things upside down like this, you create a lot more power and ease of asserting something that's true. So this is the null hypothesis, and it's our friend, right? So when you're trying to work towards facts and data, you want to think about ways that you can find a falsifiable statement in what you're kind of working towards. So I also appreciate that, like, for someone who hasn't sort of thought this way, because for me, like I've spent so much time in this like weird space that a lot of times the work for me is the opposite. It's about sort of trying to make sure that I allow enough for other non sort of enumerable factual kinds of thinking about truth. But I just want to pull people that way. So okay, so let's think about it in like just a little bit of specific practice. So the first thing is that like if we think about this as a kind of like useful cynicism, right? So I just really like one, when you're interacting with the universe, with media, with people who assert like I just have that these are the things that you should know. that you pick it what looks like an assertion, what looks like someone telling you what is the case, and you ask, how do you know that thing? And possibly even better than that, you ask, how can you know that thing? Because I think that's the really important piece. Like, a lot of times in this space, it's not so much the things that people are telling you that aren't true, it's the things that people are telling you that are impossible to know if they're true, and that's really problematic when they're being asserted as sort of factual, right? That's when you get to bullshit. Anyway, that's all I have time for in 10 minutes. So thanks very much.